Welcome back to Never Enough Novels. It's time to wrap up all the books that I read in January. I have 15 books to rate for you today. I don't know what it is about the start of the year, but I always read a ton of books in January, maybe because it's cold and there's nothing else to do. But that means I have a ton of book recommendations to share with you today, so let's get right into it. I'm going to put the links to all of these books down below, so if you want to purchase them, you can get them from Amazon and help support this channel at no extra cost to you. And as always, like this video and subscribe to see more book recommendations in the future. I decided to go through these books in order from the ones that I liked the least up to the ones that I liked the most for the month. So I'm going to start off with a book that I rated 3 stars, and that was All the Missing Pieces by Catherine Cowles. I was definitely intrigued by this because it was supposed to be a romance and a mystery together. So it had kind of that blending of genres. And it's about a true crime podcaster whose sister went missing years ago and was never found. So she is now kind of rolling into this new town to start a new series about a crime that happened there that was sort of similar to her sister's. And we find out that she's going to be tracking down possibly the same person. While she's there, she meets the local sheriff, and they do not get off on the right foot because the sheriff is actually one of the victims' brothers. So he is not interested in any press or any pressure that can be put on his sister since she already isn't doing well since her attack. However, there is definitely some sparks flying between the two of them as well. So over the course of the book, we find out more about this investigation and obviously see the relationship develop between these two. However, there is some danger involved, so that's kind of where the mystery comes in. Not only is it romance, but we're also finding out that this person who committed these terrible acts could possibly be still around and might be local to this town. While the concept sounded really intriguing, something about this just didn't quite click with me. I think at times it felt like I was reading just a mystery novel, and then there was like a little bit of romance thrown in. It felt similar to like Listen for the Lie or some of these other like true crime podcast type mysteries that I've listened to in the past. So I just felt like it didn't really know what type of book it wanted to be, and that made it a little bit harder to connect with. At 3.5 stars, I have a book called The Nightmare Before Christmas by Sarah Rash, and it's actually the prequel to this book, which is up on my TBR, called Go Luck Yourself by the same author. So this is a series of books about different families that are responsible for different holidays. So in The Nightmare Before Christmas, and the Prince of Christmas was our main character, and he hooks up with this really hot guy at a bar one night, and then later finds out that it was actually the Prince of Halloween. And these two holidays do not get along at all. In an effort to sort of keep Halloween in line, the King of Christmas decides to have the Prince of Halloween come stay and spend more time in their court. So now all of a sudden these two are enemies but are spending a lot of time together and sort of enter into this secret fling, knowing that this sort of relationship can't get out or it would ruin everything. And in the sequel, we have the second son, the other Prince of Christmas, and the Prince of St. Patrick's Day. So I'm really looking forward to this one. Ultimately, I thought this was a really interesting concept, and I liked the idea behind the books a lot. The story didn't grab me as much as I thought it might have, so that might have been a case of just having too high of expectations going in because I was really looking forward to it. But I'm definitely going to read the second one, and I'm excited to kind of have St. Patrick's Day enter the mix and see where the story goes from here. Another book I gave 3.5 stars is called The Last Room on the Left by Leah Conan. And this was described as like a feminist version of The Shining by Stephen King. So I was immediately hooked by that idea because I adore The Shining. It's one of my all-time favorite books of his. But in this story, there is a female caretaker who agrees to take on the role of watching over this kind of remote motel for 1 month during the winter. She has had some problems herself, so she's an alcoholic and her husband just left her. She decides to take this opportunity to just hunker down and work on her manuscript that is due and hopefully kind of reset her life. However, after a rough first afternoon there, she notices there's a dead body out in the snow. And now she doesn't know if this is real or something she's making up in her head, or if the killer is actually still out there. The story is told back and forth between, our main character's perspective and then also the caretaker who was there previously. So we get a back and forth timeline to try and piece together what happened at this motel. I like that there's a bit of an unreliable narrator aspect because we can't necessarily trust everything she says, and at the same time, she isn't trusting herself either. There were a lot of kind of red herring scares where you think something, terrible is going to happen and it doesn't turn out to be what you thought it was going to. And that got a little bit old over time. And this didn't quite live up to my expectations, probably because I just love The Shining and I think the writing in that is just so incredible, whereas this was like a watered down version of it. So if you particularly like this type of thriller, like it's great for winter because it's, you know, snowy setting and it's kind of a locked room where she doesn't have a lot of options. She can't really go for help anywhere. It wasn't really that scary either, which was nice. There wasn't anything horror about it. And like I said, a lot of the like scares didn't actually come to fruition. So it was more just kind of piecing together what happened over the course of the past month or two to get to this point. So if you like that idea or that concept, I would definitely give it a shot. I didn't hate the book or anything. It just wasn't as good as I hoped it was going to be. Next up is a book that I randomly found on my library shelves. I'd never heard of this author before, but the plot sounded interesting. It's called The Family Man by M.R. Armitage, and I ultimately gave this one 4 stars. It is a type of murder mystery, and it stars this detective who was involved in a case like 10 or 20 years ago that was like this horrific murderer who would go into people's houses and murder families, like everyone except the mother. So he would kill any children and the husband in like these brutal, terrible ways, but leave the mother alive to watch everything that was happening. So he was called the Family Man Killer. And the detective closed the case years ago because they thought they found the actual person who was responsible and he died. So they're like, okay, we're done. But now a case has popped up in present day that is very similar to what used to happen. So he isn't sure if this is a copycat killer or like somehow the same person responsible come back after all these years. It was like a gruesome but really interesting murder mystery type as that we went along with the detective to try and sort through the clues from the different crime scenes and try and figure out what was happening in this current situation. I thought it was really well written, and like I said, it kept me engaged the whole way through, and I think there might be more books in the series now with the same detective, so I would honestly keep going to see what else he's up to and what his other cases are. But yeah, this was just a solid overall mystery book. In a completely different genre, my next book is Quicksilver by Callie Hart, and I gave this one 4 stars. This is one that I've been meaning to read for ages. I've actually had the book sitting on my shelf for probably a year now, so I finally got around to it, and I'm so glad I did. It didn't have the same sort of all-encompassing, like heart-pounding, like want to live in this world type feel as other romantasy or fantasy books. But I thought it was really well written and interesting. I liked that it almost didn't take itself too seriously. So there wasn't a ton of world building or lengthy scenes where, you know, we're getting descriptions of things that are going on or in-depth detail about the politics of the country. Like we kind of get right into the action. And there were also moments where it almost like made fun of some of the other fantasy novels, like how serious they are. Like there was this one moment where this girl's supposed to make like a blood oath. So, you know, you have to seal it with like by cutting your hand and then shaking hands. And he's like, okay, like I need you to cut your hand. And normally you think of it as like, oh, someone's just gonna like slice their hand, which seems outrageous. So she just does like this little, just like a tiny little prick just to get like a drop of blood, which is enough. And I just thought that was hilarious because the main character is like, you're such a baby. She's like, why would I cut myself more than I need to? I was like, thank you. Someone understands the reality of that situation. Like no one would go in just like slicing their hand for no reason. So there were a lot of kind of laugh out loud moments like that for me throughout this book. Let me see. Okay, so the basic concept is that our main character is a human living in a land where water is like the main resource. So she's kind of a scrappy little thing who does anything she can to survive and just get water that they need to survive. But she is taken to the palace for committing a crime. And while there, she pulls this sword out of a substance called Quicksilver and is transported to another realm. So she is now amongst the Fae, who she always thought were just these like fairy tales and didn't actually exist. The man that pulled her through is named Kingfisher, so he's the main male character and like her love interest. So she has this ability now that she discovers to manipulate metals, including this quicksilver substance, and this creates a portal between worlds which has been frozen for as long as this sword has been in place. So now she has this ability that everyone is desperate for to manipulate Quicksilver and like reopen all of these portals to different worlds. So while she's there in this Fae realm, you know, she's kind of working with Kingfisher to try and hone her abilities, and also helping out in this ongoing war that's happening between different types of Fae that are there. So it definitely has a lot of those elements that we all know and love from fantasy. You know, there's some romance, there's some action, some war, some drama, some magic. It was a really quick read for me, and the second book I think is coming out this year, and I'm really excited to see where the story goes based on how it ended. So this is one I'm definitely looking forward to. My first straight up romance book on this list is called Not in My Book by Katie Holt. I gave this one 4 stars, and it is about two writers, and I love that it's set in kind of the literary world. Our two main characters meet in their writing class at school, but they're not like college age, they're older than that. One is a diehard romance lover, and the other just like detests the genre. So of course they clash all the time. And the professor finally decides to give them a new assignment in order to allow them to stay in class, and they have to write a combination like genre bending novel that has romance and literary fiction in order to stay in this class. These two are both reluctant to agree to anything because she doesn't want to write anything with a sad ending and he has no interest in romance. But they're forced to start writing chapters together and getting to know each other along the way, and both start to realize that there's more to each other than what they necessarily thought at the beginning. I love that we get little snippets of the book that they're writing at the start of each chapter, which I thought was just kind of a really fun literary touch. And overall, this is just a really solid contemporary romance. It was cute, there was great banter. I really liked the two characters together because there's definitely a lot of animosity, but also a lot of love there in the end. I've got a 2-for-1 recommendation for you next, and that is 2 books by Hannah Bonham Young. So this is the second book in her little series. The first one is called Out on a Limb, and I actually got this book from a publisher. Thank you, Dell, for that. So I wanted to go back and read the first book in the series first, which I actually highly recommend doing for these books. So Out on the Limb comes first, followed by Out in the Woods. And I loved both of these books so much. I gave this one 5 stars, the other one 4.5 stars, but I don't really know why. But I honestly liked them both equally. In the first book, Out on a Limb, we meet Win and Bo, who are both physically disabled in some way, and they meet at a Halloween party because they're both dressed as pirates because they're using their like physical disabilities as part of the costume. They don't take themselves too seriously, and there's definitely the attraction there, so they end up sleeping together that first night. What results is an unexpected pregnancy. So Win had no desire to get pregnant, but now that this has kind of happened, she's starting to come around to the idea and like decides that she does actually really want to be a mother. And when she tells Bo, he is actually very into the idea as well. So these two don't really know each other at all, but now they're taking on this role of parenting together. The book takes place over the 9 months of Win's pregnancy as her and Bo go through all these different steps together, as well as like start to get to know each other, and they realize there might actually be something real for their relationship as well outside of just being co-parents. I normally do not like the surprise pregnancy trope. So if you are like me and normally don't want that in your books, I promise you still need to give this one a shot because it was so well done. It was heartwarming and charming and obviously a huge part of the story, but in like the best possible way. Throughout that story, we also get to know Sarah and Caleb, and they are a married couple. Sarah is Win's best friend, and Caleb knows Bo through their D&D group. So Out of the Woods actually focuses on Sarah and Caleb's relationship. And I adored this because it features a married couple, which is something we don't get very often in romance books, and I feel like we need more of this. In this book, Sarah is feeling a little bit lost. Her and Caleb have been together since high school and have a very like healthy and happy relationship, but he is also someone who just like wants to protect her and like always steps in. He's kind of the knight in shining armor type. She just feels the need to get a better sense of herself and feel like she has accomplished something in her life. So she's going through a little bit of a self crisis, and Caleb just like doesn't understand what's wrong, and she feels like they're growing apart but doesn't really know why or how to fix it. So at someone else's suggestion, Sarah signs them up for a wilderness course that is supposed to help couples reconnect. So they are subjected to 7 days in the wilderness with these sort of therapists and a couple other couples. And the whole goal is, again, to like help them get to the bottom of some of their issues and reconnect with each other. I love any romance that's set in nature with people who don't do nature, because I just think it's hilarious and something I can very easily relate to as they try to deal with like setting up tents and bugs and falls and like hiking for miles and miles and miles. And that adds such an element of hilarity to this story. So it's got a lot of depth as we see this couple kind of get to know each other again and figure out what they need from each other, as well as a lot of like really funny moments with the other couples who are there. And obviously the wilderness is basically its own character. I just cannot recommend this highly enough. And like I said, I would love to see more romances with already married couples. It's such a realistic situation. Like after the happy ever after, everything isn't just automatically perfect for the rest of their lives. Like couples go through struggles, and this was a really great way to show what that looks like, but also how it can be resolved. If you have any other recommendations like this, let me know in the comments. Now we're really getting into the good stuff because all of the rest of these books are 5-star reads. This was like an excellent start to the year with so many good books that I can share. So next up is Dream Girl Drama by Tessa Bailey. This one comes with beautiful sprayed edges. I just adore these. This is technically the third book in her like sports romance series, but they can very easily be read as standalones. If you've seen any of my other videos, I feel like I've talked about this a lot so far this year, so I'm just going to give a brief overview. Our two main characters are Sig and Chloe. Sig is a hockey player, and Chloe is like a socialite. So he meets her one night when his car breaks down outside of her country club, and they hit it off immediately, and they share like this really hot kiss and agree to see each other again soon. But later that night, Sig shows up at his dad's house, and he is introduced to his dad's girlfriend, who is Chloe's mom. On top of that, they announce that they're getting engaged. Now, Sig and Chloe, who had this great connection, are going to be step siblings. Obviously, that throws a wrench in any sort of relationship, so they agree to keep things platonic, but Chloe also needs some help getting out from under her mother's thumb, so she decides to move to Boston to be near Sig and have him help her kind of learn to be independent and learn to live on her own. So these two start spending tons and tons of time together. He's like this crazy overprotective guy who just wants the best for her and wants to give her everything that she wants. And she brings so much joy to his life and just like a lightness that he doesn't have. But obviously, they're still in the same situation where their parents are getting married. So they're trying to navigate this weird, forbidden romance. Both are kind of high profile and can't let this sort of thing get out, or it could possibly like ruin careers. So they're in a really tough spot, but like these opposite attracts are clearly meant to be. So I loved this entire ride, watching them get to know each other, become friends, and like fall more deeply in love, and then see how it all wrapped up. I know it's not the holidays anymore, but I did have one small little holiday novella on my list. It was called The Christmas Book Hunt by Jenny Colgan. This was a very short and sweet little novel. I think it's like set during the holidays, but it doesn't really have a ton of like Christmassy aspects. It's about a woman who is hunting down this rare copy of a book for her great aunt who is dying, and she is like searching desperately in all these different bookstores throughout England and Scotland to try and find a copy of this book. And along the way, she meets a guy who kind of agrees to help her, but he is working for a like rare bookseller who also wants to get his hands on the book. So he kind of keeps his motives secret from her. So they go on this like little adventure through all these different bookshops trying to find this book, and ultimately like start to fall in love, but he's keeping this secret from her. So there's still a little bit of conflict between the two of them. But this was just a really charming little novel. I really liked it for what it was. On the far steamier side of the romance genre, I read The Charlie Method by Elle Kennedy, and this is another book that's the third in a series. I think it's her Campus Diaries or Off Campus series. So the first one was The Graham Effect, then The Dixon Rule, and now The Charlie Method. And I have adored every book in this series. I think it is like the best that she's ever done. So The Charlie Method was no exception. Our main character is Charlotte, or Charlie, who's kind of this like stick straight good girl, but she has this secret wild side that no one really knows about, where she goes on these late night hookups, like drives fast cars, and just doesn't want anyone to know about this side of her. But she meets these two guys who are on an app, and they like to share their women. So Charlie is definitely intrigued by this concept, and when she eventually meets them in person, she finds out that they are two fellow students at Briar University, and they are hockey players. So we know these two characters from the previous books in the series, but you don't have to really read the other books first. These all can be read as standalones. But these two are used to, like I said, hooking up with one woman together, but they also don't ever develop feelings. Either the woman develops, stronger feelings for just one of them, or, everyone agrees that it's just like a one-time thing. So they're used to just kind of having fun and not getting into anything serious. But things are definitely different with Charlie, and she feels this too. However, this sort of relationship is definitely not accepted by society or by anyone in their circles. So they are not sure how to navigate the situation where they assumed it would all be fun and games, but now they're actually developing stronger feelings for each other and might want to pursue this relationship past college. This book is steamy, especially with this sort of scenario. There is a lot of spicy scenes in this book. I just ate it all up and absolutely loved seeing Charlie kind of let herself go and learn to be herself and not put up this facade with these two men. And they both met her needs in very different ways, but just proved to be absolutely everything that she ever could have wanted. I loved everything about it, so I highly recommend this one. Next up is a romance from another favorite author, and that is Beg, Borrow, or Steal by Sarah Adams. It's technically set in her like Rome, Kentucky series. So our main female character is the sister of some of the other characters in her books. But again, this is another scenario where it can be read easily as a standalone. So Emily is our main character, and she is a teacher at the local school, and she finds out that her nemesis Jack is back in town, and she is like determined to ruin his life. These two have been at odds like their entire lives, and everyone kind of knows like, oh, Jack and Emily, they don't get along, they hate each other. Unfortunately, when Emily accidentally sends her secret romance manuscript to her school's principal, Jack is the only one who can help her. So he is so charming and everyone loves him. So, of course, he has keys to the principal's house. One night they go on this crazy adventure to like break into the principal's house, hack into his email, and delete her manuscript. And of course, after that, they start to like spend more time together, and they both realize that all of this animosity that's built up over the years isn't based just on hate. There is definitely like an attraction there. And all these things they thought about the other person weren't necessarily true. Their wires got crossed all these years ago, and they've just like built up this contentious relationship for no reason. So obviously this is a really fun enemies to lovers romance. I love the fact that they're teachers and they're both writers, so you get a little bit of that literary aspect as well. But if you adore any type of small town romance, enemies to lovers, or anything by Sarah Adams, you are going to love this one too. One of the audiobooks I listened to this month was the first book in the Zodiac Academy series. This was technically a reread for me, but it was the first time I was listening on audio because I saw that they did the graphic audio version of these books, which means there's a full cast as well as like sound effects, so it feels like you're more involved in the story, and this was a fantastic way to listen to these books. I've heard the series described as like a darker Harry Potter. It's a situation where two girls find out they actually are fae and have magical powers, so they're sent to this school to kind of train to learn how to use their powers. They also find out they are the long lost heirs to the throne. However, there is a group of 4 guys who have lived their entire lives thinking they are actually going to ascend next into power. So these 4 guys are not happy to have these 2 girls on campus, and they make their lives horrible. This is definitely a darker romance. There is not a lot of romance to be found anywhere at the start because these 4 men do horrible things to these girls, but it does change throughout the series. So if you want like a darker, brutal type romantasy book, I adore this series. Some of the books later on get kind of long-winded, but especially at the beginning, like they're really tight and fast-paced, and they are just going to have you like flipping through pages so fast. I think they're slowly releasing each of the books as graphic audio, so like the second one is also available, and I'm just waiting for the rest of the ones now. My one more general fiction read this month is called What Happened to the McCraes by Tracy Lang. I don't normally read a ton of books from this genre, but Tracy Lang is definitely my one exception. This is my 3rd book of hers that I've read, and I just adore every single one. She writes families and relationships just so well. It's incredibly realistic and both like heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. She doesn't shy away from difficult topics, but also manages to like provide a lot of hope and like uplifting moments at the same time. So it just feels a lot like real life in her writing. In this book, the main character, Kyle McRae, is coming back to his hometown after a few years away after his father had a stroke, and he kind of abandoned everyone 2 years ago, including his wife, Casey. So she in particular is not happy to have him back, but he starts to realize that some other people in town, like he left a bigger hole than he realized, and he's sort of looking for a chance at redemption. So he's given the opportunity to help coach this local hockey team of like middle schoolers, and he decides to try it out and starts to fall in love with this town all over again and realize that, leaving might not have been the right thing. However, there is an enormous trigger warning in this book that made it very difficult, like especially for me specifically, to read. If you don't want to know what that is, because it is a little bit of a surprise plot point, skip ahead a little bit. I'll like wave my hand or something once we get back to the regular books. The trigger warning is that there is the death of a young child that is a major plot point in this book. The events are described on page about what happened, as well as we see a lot of discussion about how the parents are affected, what happened back then, and like how they're still dealing with the trauma as well. There's also a suicide attempt. So this book has some really heavy topics. And like I said, for me in particular, it was really, really difficult to read some of these scenes and like imagine them. However, it is like crucial to the book, and I can see why Tracy built an entire story about this sort of situation happening, because there are just such a wide range of emotions, and obviously death is present in our everyday lives in different ways. And she just like handled the situation so well, and you just felt like you were living it right there with the characters, but also like feeling all of their despair and hopelessness, but at the same time like learning to live again. And like there was still, like I said, hope and love and happiness like on the other side for these characters. Overall, okay, back to the regular book. Overall, this book was just phenomenal. I recommend all of her books if you want just like kind of general family dramas. I think she just does a really good job writing people, and that's what makes them so incredible. If you've made it this far, the last book on my list, and the one that I would probably put as my absolute favorite book of the month, unexpectedly, is Lights Out by Nevessa Allen. It's really popular on Book Talk, I guess, but it is a super dark, like spicy romance. I got the audiobook on Libby and highly, highly recommend listening to this one because the two narrators do such an incredible job telling the story. But you guys, this book is wild. It was definitely darker than anything I've ever read so far, but like I was into it. It has masked men, it has like stalking, there's very different types of sexual play that they get involved with, but at the same time, it's like really lighthearted and charming at times as well. So like our female character and male main character, like she loves all these different like thirst traps on Instagram, and she kind of follows a bunch of these guys who do ridiculous things with like masks and handcuffs and knives and other things. And our male main character is one of those people, and he finds out her real life identity and like starts to stalk her and like discover, does she actually want these things in real life? So the beginning of their relationship is like crazy intense. But at the same time, like this guy is just the nicest, like golden retriever personality. And there were so many times where I was laughing out loud at his inner dialogue and like the things that he's doing, because he's got this like scary sort of personality, but he's still a real guy, and he's like nerdy in real life and also like unsure of himself, which made him just an adorable male main character. There were just so many different elements of this book that I absolutely loved, from the spicy scenes and like the crazy things they get up to the really sweet moments when he was just there for her and kind of giving her everything that she needed as a support system. And also just some of the shenanigans that they got up to together. There was an accidental murder, disposing of a body. So, I mean, this is not your typical romance. And if none of this sounds interesting, like just go ahead and pass. But I promise, like if you want to give it a try, it will be worth your while. Okay, that officially wraps up all of my 15 ratings for the books that I read in January. If you want to head back and see what I read last month, you can check out that video here, and make sure you hit subscribe to see even more book recommendations in the future.